Joining me now, U.S. Senator Democrat from Virginia, Tim Kaine, ran for vice president, as you know, 2016, with Hillary Clinton. Hey, Senator, good to have you with us.
Hey, John, good to be back, man.
Well, we got a lot to talk about today, right? So much to talk about, so little time.
There's plenty.
So let's get right to it. I want to start with AUMF, authorization for military forces. Everyone knows you've been at the forefront of this since you've gained office and got to the upper chamber in 2013. We're still operating off an AUMF that dates back 3 administrations ago and almost 2 decades ago. Now, what happened, Senator, which really disturbed a lot of us, and I had her on my show, Congresswoman from Oakland, Barbara Lee, got a new AUMF debate through appropriation. She got it through the subcommittee. Then she got it, shockingly, through the full committee. It had bipartisan backing. And then, Senator Kaine, in the middle of the night, the GOP majority leader, when it went to rules, Paul Ryan, at midnight, stripped it out and sent it to rules. And that's the end of it. Now, how do we move this thing forward now?
Well, John, so real quick, there was a very weird thing over on the House side, and then I'll tell you on the Senate. But I think the thing that's interesting is that when Congresswoman Lee, who was the only Congresswoman to vote against even the 9/11 authorization because she thought it was too broadly worded, she basically put on the table the current authorizations will expire in 8 months, and that's to give us time to come up with a better one for right now. And she got Republicans and Democrats on board. Clearly, the Speaker didn't want to have that discussion, so used House rules to strip it out. But here's what's going on the Senate side. Jeff Flake and I have been partners in this, Republican from Arizona, since early 2015. And we had one version of an authorization that went nowhere in our committee, but we really rethought it and came at it from a different angle, which is instead of just authorizing military action against ISIS, which we really think there's no authorization that fits what we're doing against ISIS, let's talk more generally about using military action against non-state actors. Non-states are different than states. The geography is harder to define. There's never going to be a surrender and a peace treaty and a peace negotiation. They don't follow Geneva Conventions about war. So we have drafted sort of an all-purpose military authorization against the current non-states who are engaged in conflict with ISIS, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. And then we've put up a set of limitations about who could be considered an associated group, what geography are we able to carry out military action in, and a sunset provision that would force an expiration, because right now we're living under what I call kind of a zombie authorization. It's 16 years old and it doesn't have a time limit. It'll never die. We had a hearing about this in the Foreign Relations Committee yesterday. It's the second hearing we've had in the last month. It was a closed-door session, and we had Secretaries Tillerson and Mattis with us, and it was very productive. While the administration claims, just like the Obama administration and just like the Bush administration, we have all the authorities we need, they nevertheless, especially Secretary Mattis and General Dunford, say, but now is the time to do a new authorization because this Congress hasn't weighed in for a very long time. We ought to be sending a message to our allies, to the Sunni extremist terrorist organizations, and to our troops that we're serious about this. But they also get that the earlier authorization was just too open-ended, and so they expressed some conceptual support for some of the kind of guardrails and limitations that Jeff Flake and I have put into our authorization. So the next step is to now move beyond we're having hearings to an actual markup of the authorization that we've done. Right. And I think our chairman, Bob Corker from Tennessee, and our ranking member, Ben Cardin of Maryland, are ready to do that when we return in September. So it was very, very positive. I think a lot of common ground around the table among Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. Still some details to work out, but I think this is finally catching fire a little bit after I've been working on it for 5 years.
So in order to get it through the Senate chamber, Senator Kaine, do you need 51 votes or do you need 60?
This would be a 60-voter, John. So right now, the default rule in the Senate on any legislation is only if it's a purely budgetary matter that can fit under budget reconciliation can you do it with 51 votes. So if it's policy at all, it takes 60. And on something like this that's this momentous, frankly, we ought to be trying to get it through with 80 or 90 or 95. So just for your listeners, it's interesting when you do a war authorization, it doesn't go through the Armed Services Committee; it goes through the Foreign Relations Committee, which is interesting. So we first have to get this through committee, but Jeff and I are working on it very hard, and we do feel like we've got some momentum. And then if we get it through, the key will be, can we get it through our committee with a strong bipartisan vote? If we do, we can get it off the floor with a strong bipartisan vote. As you know, I drafted an authorization in 2014 after we started the war against ISIS, and I got it through the committee, but it was on a partisan vote, barely got it through. That meant it had no momentum when it got to the floor. To have momentum on the floor, we've got to get this thing through committee with a strong bipartisan vote. And the discussion we had yesterday with these two cabinet secretaries, give me some hope that we can do that.
So, Senator, even if that happened and it went back to the House, look, I mean, Paul Ryan just had an opportunity. All Barbara Lee wanted to do was to get a debate. That's all. I mean, after the debate, you could vote yes or no. Paul Ryan stripped it out at midnight and dumped it into rules where that was the end of it. What's to stop them from doing that again?
Well, John, they could do it again, but let me give it the most charitable interpretation. I'm a glass half full guy.
All right.
I think what Ryan, the speaker, was worried about, and he indicated this, is if you say that the current authorization is going to expire and you don't have the other one in place, you do jeopardize not only current military operations, but even the legal status, for example, of detainees at Guantanamo. So I think that there's a difference between, I don't want to say that it's going to expire in 8 months unless I know that there's a follow-on. And Secretary Mattis said this pretty clearly yesterday. He said, look, you should do a new authorization. Even though we think we have authorities, they're so old, you ought to do a new one, but don't repeal the old one until the new one is in place. And so my interpretation of the speaker's action was not that I'm not interested in this topic at all. It's just that I don't want to repeal the current authorization or even say we're going to unless and until there is a follow-on that has been embraced.
Well, it sounds like kind of repeal and replace, which we'll get to in a minute. But
repeal and replace. That's right. Where have I heard that before?
There's the segue. But now, if it did pass both chambers, it doesn't have to go to the president, right? I mean, this is just an internal policy.
Very interesting. Very interesting question. It would be an authorization for use of military force. I actually think the president would sign it because I'm going back to 2001. President Bush asked for it. He submitted a version, and Congress adopted a different version, and then it went to the president. And I actually do think it went up and was signed. But that's I'm pretty sure it would go up to the president for signature.
So he's going to have to sign it.
And in the dialogue with his two cabinet secretaries, again, they say, well, while we think the authorities are legally valid, we do think it would be a good idea for Congress to get in the game. So we're not getting like red or yellow lights from the administration. They care about the details, obviously, but we're getting kind of a green light from them.
I think it would be a hard thing for the president to veto. I can say that now.
Yeah.
When I go to the press briefings the next time I'm called on, that's my question, is where does the administration stand? If they get an AUMF, are they going to sign it or not? And I'd like to get their answer on it. But President Trump campaigned on getting us out of these wars, and so his base is going to hold him accountable to that. Vetoing this, I think they would have a very hard time explaining that one. So I think you're on the right path. But speaking of repeal and replace, look, my view, Obamacare now is here to stay. So I have two questions. One is, how do we fix it going forward? And I know there's a new move in the Senate led by Chairman Lamar Alexander in order to bring a bipartisan view in. But I'm getting this question from my listeners that I want to just get to before anything else. People are saying, why don't members of Congress and their staffs have to deal with the same Obamacare as everybody else? Why do they get preferential treatment? Can you start, Senator, with that?
Well, I don't think we do get preferential treatment. We're on the exchanges too. What I sometimes hear, there's this argument, oh, but Congress gets a subsidy. Why does Congress get a subsidy and their staffs? What we get is what most employees of large organizations get, that our employer pays a share of our insurance. So if you work at Capital One, if you work at Dominion, if you work with, companies, probably 60 to 70 million Americans work for private companies where the employer pays a portion of their premium. And it's the same with us. But we are not treated differently than Americans with respect to the Affordable Care Act. We are under the Affordable Care Act, and we have an employer that pays a share of our health insurance, just like my law firm used to pay the share of every employee's health insurance at my law firm. So that is the way we are treated. For a long time, I was not on the federal policy because I was on my wife's policy when she was working for the state of Virginia, and I had just been on her policy and didn't switch over. But when she resigned as Secretary of Education last year, we are now on the federal policy, but we're treated like others.
Okay, so repeal and replace. There is no repeal, there is no replace, but Obamacare is imploding. Bernie Sanders the other day said he's going to introduce a single-payer system program. Senator, are you in favor of a single-payer system in the United States for health care?
John, let me answer the first thing you raised, and then I'll talk about single payer, your question there. So you are right. I am on the health committee. So I got added to the Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray Health Committee when I came back from the campaign trail in November. And I've been asking since January, can't we please put this in committee and find bipartisan fixes? And look, if the Republicans want to call what we do a replacement, doesn't bother me at all. I'm going to probably call it a reform or a repair, but the real issue is, can we improve health care for Americans? And the committee has been blocked from doing that. The leader McConnell has basically said, no, we're going to do this under a budget reconciliation process that just means we draft a bill up in secret and try to push it to the floor. But this health committee, John, is a great committee. As you know, Lamar Alexander, he was the governor of Tennessee, had a Medicaid program. He was the president of the University of Tennessee, hospital, medical school, physician practice groups. We've got 2 other governors on the committee. We have 2 doctors on the committee. Everybody on the committee has health experiences of their own. So we've just been waiting for the opportunity to be engaged. So here's what I think you'll see. In September, we will come back. The Lamar and Patty have announced a series of hearings with insurance commissioners, governors, patients, doctors immediately, and then they want to take steps to stabilize the individual market. If you're buying health insurance not through an employer, there are parts of the country where even though an insurance company may write policies for an employer plan, they won't write a policy for an individual family. So that's the unstable part of the market right now. We're going to come back in September and try to do a couple of very simple things to stabilize the individual market and we think we can do some things that would stabilize the market for a year or so, while we then have a more significant discussion over time about what are some fixes that can be made. So now on significant fixes, Bernie is going to file, if he hasn't already, he's going to file a single-payer bill. I prefer something other than that. I prefer giving people a public option rather than forcing them into, you've got to have government insurance. So you could basically, as you know, Medicare right now, it's parts A through D. There's different parts of Medicare, and I've kind of thought about, well, if you could have a Medicare Part E, and the E would be for everybody, and just let people buy into Medicare. It would be a separate fund. It would have to be actuarially balanced, but if you wanted to buy a Medicare policy at any point in your life, you'd pay a premium and you'd buy it. And since Medicare works in every zip code in the United States already, there's not going to be counties or states where it wouldn't be available. If you offered that and made that available for individuals, or made it available if employers wanted to use that for their employees, then there would be competition everywhere and you would bring prices down. But if, on the other hand, you didn't want to have a government insurance product and you wanted to buy one from Anthem or Aetna, great, you could do that too. So I favor increasing options rather than reducing options. So I would really prefer that rather than a single-payer system.
And so we're out of time, but just for clarification, for the public option for Medicaid Part E that you would create, that would be self-financed, right? So
yeah, it would be. It would be financed separately than the other Medicare program, Medicare for seniors. So you would have to pay a premium. The actuaries would figure it out. They'd figure out what the premium is. But because Medicare doesn't have to earn a profit, they don't have to pay state and local taxes. They don't have to pay big salaries to high-priced execs. Medicare could offer, I think, a very reasonably priced insurance policy for people, whether they're 21 years old or 62 years old, and it would be a very legitimate option that I think would increase competition and bring prices down without forcing everybody to have government insurance if they didn't want it.
And then people could make their own decisions. I don't see why that would be a bad thing at all. That seems to make sense to me.
It's likely that Senator Bennett of Colorado and I are sort of working on a proposal. It's not yet completely done, but as we get into the longer-term discussion, I think we're going to put that on the table. But I am very convinced that Senators Alexander and Murray can work our committee into a position where we can take a couple of steps ASAP that will stabilize the individual insurance market and then give us the time to have the broader discussion. At the end of the day, it shouldn't be Obamacare, it should be AmeriCare. We should come up with the right come up with the right package of solutions that can last.
Okay, Senator Tim Kaine, thanks for being with us, sir. We're out of time. I want to thank you, as always, for our frank and candid dialogue. When we have you back, there's so many other things going on, but my next time I get a question at the White House press briefing, I am going to ask whether or not the president is going to sign your new AUMF if it hits his desks. That
would be a great question to ask, and I look forward to talking soon.
All right, sir. Thanks for being with us. Senator Tim Kaine, more information, timkaine.com. I'll be right back.